Hello and welcome to the show that doesn't have a name because this one isn't a Q&A. I am your host, Panyo Basa, and you may notice that I'm sitting in a different room from usual because my sweetheart's mama has come to visit us for Thanksgiving and she is occupying the studio upstairs. And doing a video outdoors lately is not much of an option because it is below freezing out there. So I'm down here in the basement with 17 dogs. And so there may be some background noise on this one, although 15 of the 17 are small puppies. And so any background noise may consist mainly of just squeaking and like slurping on mama's titty or something. So anyway, this video is by request. There was somebody I don't remember exactly where, but they requested that I do a video on Burmese religious monuments, or religious monuments in Burma, in Myanmar, as it is also called. And so I'm no authority on Burmese religious monuments, but I had lived in Burma for more than 20 years. And I've been to a lot of them, and I've got certain favorite ones, and I know something about the history and so forth. And so this is not going to be exhaustive, but it'll be sort of a brief overview of like religious Buddhist monuments in the country of Myanmar. And the person who requested that I do this video says that he's been reading books on the subject, and so I'm probably not going to be able to say much that he doesn't already know. But I'm just going to do it anyway. And this may be kind of a niche video. I mean, most of you may have no interest at all in Burmese Buddhist monuments, but that's unfortunate. It's just, I don't know, maybe you can knit or something while I'm talking. And so without any further ado, I'm going to try to first give like a brief account of the early ancient and medieval history of Burma. And some of the oldest monuments that still exist go back to fairly early times. And so probably the first civilized ethnicity living in what is now Burma or Myanmar, and like people that lived in towns instead of living in huts or caves or something, they would be the Hmons. That's the earliest ones I know of. And they are Australasian. I think their race or ethnicity would be Australasian. They are related to the Cambodians. And they had an empire in southern Burma and also like western Thailand, going back in ancient times, possibly going as far back as the time of the Indian Emperor Ashoka, or maybe even Gautama Buddha himself. And Ashoka sent missionaries in all directions, Buddhist missionaries, to spread the Dhamma. And he sent some to a western land called Suvarnabhumi, or the Golden Land, and that in all likelihood, in my opinion, was this same kingdom of the Hmons. And they were Theravadins from very early on. And so most of the Theravada Buddhism in Southeast Asia it started like in South India and Sri Lanka, but the first people to really adopt it in Southeast Asia were the Hmons, apparently, and then it spread from them into Thailand and into other parts of Burma. And then around, I don't know, maybe the 5th century CE, there was another civilized race, town-dwelling race called the Pew, who lived in sort of central Burma. And they do have some ruins, like temple ruins and like city wall ruins and that sort of thing, mainly around the modern city of Phrae in Burma, which is sort of eastern, southern, central Burma. And there is a place called Sri Kshetra, which was their capital, and it is some kind of archaeological site, and you can go there and see a lot of crumbly old pagodas and so forth. Although the thing is, in southern Burma especially, it rains a lot. And considering that most of the architecture and the monuments going back to old times are made of brick, like baked mud, it doesn't stand up very well to the weather, and also to the fact that when you've got lots and lots of rain, you've got like tree seedlings sprouting between the bricks, and then they grow into big trees, and it just wrecks the buildings. So there's really not a whole lot of truly ancient stuff still remaining from early Buddhist Burma. Anyway, around maybe the 7th or 8th century of the Common Era, the ethnic Burmese migrated south from China. And like the Pew, they're a Tibeto-Burmese, so they're related to the Tibetans more than to the Chinese. And they conquered like the northern frontier areas of the Pew civilization until finally they just kept spreading until they conquered the Pews. And then around the 11th century, King Anuradha of Burma, of the Burmese Empire, which had its capital in Pagan, he was converted to Theravada, maybe just for political reasons, maybe it was like a deep conviction thing. But there was a Hmong Buddhist monk missionary named Shin Arahan, or who's nowadays called Shin Arahan by the Burmese. And he went to Pagan and was able to persuade King Anuradha that Theravada was better Dhamma than the kind of Buddhism that they were practicing, which was a kind of shamanistic, sort of like a tantric Tibetan kind of Buddhism called Maha'ari. And the Maha'aris, we can believe the chronicles, and the chronicles are probably written by devout Theravadins who didn't like the Maha'aris much. They drank alcohol, they practiced martial arts like boxing, and also they had what is sometimes called the jus primae noctis, which means that if a girl was going to get married, before her wedding night, she had to spend the night at this Maha'ari monastery, or one of the Maha'ari monasteries, and the Maha'ari monks would teach her in the ways of sensual passion or something. So that's kind of, I should continue that because this King Anuradha of Pagan, like in the 11th century, decided that he was going to decree that his kingdom was going to be Theravada Buddhist from then on. He sent to the king of the Hmons in the kingdom of the Hmon kingdom in the south. He asked them for some copies of the Pali texts, and for some reason, the king of the south, the Hmon king, refused. And so King Anuradha just invaded and conquered them, and captured the king and the queen of the Hmons and kept them in a kind of a prison building. But after that, Burma just had its ups and downs. You know, they got conquered by the Mongols, and then there was some Shans were ruling Upper Burma, and then there'd be the occasional like what do you call it, a resurgence of Burmese nationalism. The kingdom of the Hmons expanded again, and it became powerful in the south again, and then the Burmese finally conquered them again, and then you got the British, and now it's modern times. So that's the history of Burma. So with regard to the monuments, I guess I should just do it region by region. Start with Rangoon, also called Yangon nowadays. And anybody who comes to Burma, even if they're not going to do a tour of Buddhist monuments, you know, almost everyone's going to be familiar with the Shwedagon Pagoda, which is a huge pagoda covered with probably mostly gold leaf or gold paint towards the bottom, but at the top it starts getting thicker and thicker gold plate. And at the very top of a standard Burmese pagoda, you've got what is called the T, which means the umbrella, and it's just encrusted with diamonds and rubies and so forth. And there's little telescopes down at the bottom where you can look up at the encrusted diamonds and rubies and stuff at the top. I assume they're real. I assume the army didn't take them down and replace them with glass. And the Shwedagon, I mean, pagodas are supposed to entomb the relics of a great saint, preferably an enlightened being. And this goes all the way back to like the Proto-Indo-European Kurgan civilization that would make burial mounds over their chieftains. And that evolved over the centuries, over the millennia, into like a bell-shaped pile of bricks, supposedly enshrining the relics of some saint. And the Shwedagon has supposedly the relics of 4 Buddhas. It's got some hairs from our Buddha. And then there's Mahakassapa before him. He was like a legendary, more or less mythological Buddha from hundreds of thousands of years ago, supposedly. There's some relic of his. I think it's like a bath cup or a walking stick or something. And then there are 2 Buddhas even before him, probably going back millions of years in accordance with Burmese or Theravada Buddhist tradition. And yeah, so supposedly there are these 4 Buddhas, relics of these 4 Buddhas enshrined under the Shwedagon, but of course nobody sees them because it's solid. You know, it's just sort of buried underneath. So they just take it on faith that, you know, they're in there, and that sort of makes the Shwedagon a holy place. Probably the Shwedagon was originally constructed by Mons back when Rangoon was part of the Mon Empire. And it just got bigger and bigger. Like later kings would want to improve it and make it better and bigger, and so they just add layers to it over time. And it is worth seeing, definitely. There's a whole complex around the Shwedagon with all sorts of little temples and, you know, smaller pagodas, lots and lots of smaller pagodas, some museums you can go in and look at stuff. So it's worth it. With regard to other places in Rangoon, the only place that really is outstanding in my mind with regard to some Buddhist site that is like good to go and see would be Bodatown Pagoda, which is not a very big pagoda. It's not a very pretty pagoda. But the weird thing about it is that it also goes back to ancient times, like back to the Mons before the Burmese ever made it to Burma. And during World War II, it took a direct hit from a bomb and was just blown wide open. And so when archaeologists were digging around, they found this black lump. It's sort of pagoda shaped, but I'm not sure if it was shaped by human hands or if it's like a meteorite or something. I can't remember now. I just remember this black lumpy thing that they found, and that was sort of like the nucleus of this whole pagoda. So they built a new pagoda, and they've got this really kind of interesting yet also cheesy museum just showing all sorts of things, including the black lumpy thing. And one good thing about Bodatown Pagoda is it's got a pond with turtles in the back that you can feed. So that's nice. I like feeding turtles. In Mon State, as I say, there's almost no really ancient stuff. It just rains a lot in Mon State, and so stuff just it just gets destroyed if it's made out of mud brick. But in the south, in that general area, Thatone was the capital, and there's a lot of pagodas just throughout Mon State, and a lot of them in Thatone, but they tend to be medieval or modern. There's no really ancient stuff that I can think of. There is one famous pagoda in that area. It's like the 2nd or 3rd most famous pagoda in Burma. It's called Chaitio. And it's a small pagoda. It's probably less than 20 feet tall. But it's built on top of a boulder, and this boulder is somehow balanced on top of this peak. It's like this peak that sticks up like this, and then this boulder on top of it, and this little pagoda on top of that. And the boulder is so precarious you can even rock it. I assume, there's a limitation to how much it'll rock. It's stable. It hasn't blown off in the wind or in storms or in earthquakes or anything. It's been there for centuries. And the Burmese, of course, think that a wizard put the rock on top of the pinnacle, although it may be that a geologist could explain how it happened naturally. And it used to be you'd have to walk this trail, and the rich people that didn't want to walk uphill the whole way would be carried on like what do you call them? Sort of like palanquins, or they'd get into like a hammock on this stick, and there'd be like two bears would carry them up. Although now I think there's a road going all the way to the top. And typical of Burma, there's a certain issue that some Westerners may find issue with. I had a friend who used to lead religious tours through Burma, like, visiting some of the major pagodas and temples and so forth. And they went to Chai Tio, the little pagoda on the boulder, and they were informed that women are not allowed to stick gold leaf onto the boulder, because a lot of people would be sticking gold leaf. It looks like a gold boulder now. Only men or males are allowed to stick gold leaf onto the boulder, and the women, these Western women, they were just indignant, and they pretty much boycotted the whole country afterwards. They would just sit in the van and sulk, or sit in the bus and just not get out and go and look at some other sexist site. And that is pretty common. Like the Shwedagon that I mentioned, it has an upper platform that people are allowed to go up on, but only males are allowed to go up on this upper platform. I've been up on it before, and it's nothing really spectacular. You only get to go a little higher up, maybe 10 feet higher than ground level. And I think it's just Burmese policy now that no Westerners are allowed on this platform, because it's just inevitable that women are going to want to go up and won't be allowed, and then they'll make a stink and a fuss, and it's just so unpleasant that it's just foreigners don't get to go on the upper platform anymore. And in Mon State, probably my favorite temple there is called Chai Kami. Chai apparently is like a Mon name. That Chai Tio that I mentioned, the place on the pagoda on top of the boulder, that's in Karen State. But back in the day, it was all part of the Mon Empire down in the south. So anyway, there's this place called Chai Kami, which is out in the ocean a little ways. There's like a causeway that you go out to this pagoda. It's not really a pagoda. It's a temple that you can go inside. Unlike the standard medieval or modern, mainly modern Burmese pagoda, which is just a bell-shaped pile of bricks. It's just solid. You can't go inside of it. There's an older form of temple called a pato, which usually has a square foundation, like a square base, sort of a pagoda-shaped thing on top, and you can go inside and there'll be like a big Buddha image there, and who knows what else. So Chai Kami, I've been there a few times, and the temple itself is nothing special really. I mean, there's no breathtaking splendor, but it is out in the seawater, and there's a little mangrove forest there, which it's cool for me. I have a degree in marine biology, and you see trees growing up out of the ocean. It's just kind of counterintuitive. Like mostly plants don't like seawater, except for like seaweed, of course. And there's mud skippers there, which are little fish that they gulp a mouthful of water, and then they come up on land, and they're like slithering around on the land with holding this water in their mouth that they run over their gills somehow. So that's cool. But like with Chai Tio, Chai Kami, women are not allowed to go inside the temple. So there's this cheesy smaller temple over to one side, and the women can go there and look through the window at the somewhat larger, less cheesy Chai Kami. And I mean, this is just kind of unavoidable. So I think liberated feminists should do their religious tourism in some other country, probably. But again, Chai Kami is nice mainly just because of the mangroves and the mud skippers. And like most Burmese architecture can be very disappointing. But there are a few places that can be really spectacular, and one is the ancient city of Pagan, or maybe you can call it the medieval city of Pagan. Marco Polo went there, and it was the capital of the Burmese Empire, starting around the 10th century up until the Mongols sacked it. Some general of Kublai Khan came down, and first they demanded tribute, and the Burmese kings, who considered themselves to be invincible or something, just flatly refused. And so Kublai Khan didn't even bother coming himself. He just sent a general down to sack Pagan, conquer it, and put somebody else in charge of it as governor or something. So you go there, and in Marco Polo's time, there was probably more than 10,000 temples just in this one relatively small area. The city walls are still there, so it wasn't really a big city, but it was a town. It was the capital. The king lived there, and just as far as the eye can see, it's just like the landscape is studded with temples, and they're of the Pateau variety mostly. The solid bell-shaped mound of bricks. I mean, it is represented in a few of the famous temples, including one of the oldest ones. So it goes way back, but possibly because there was a kind of intellectual inspiration among the Burmese during the flower of their empire, they decided to have buildings that you can actually go inside of. And there's some really magnificent architecture there. Like the most famous temple in Pagan is the Ananda Paya. And Paya, I mean, the Burmese take pagodas very seriously. It's been referred to as a pagoda cult, where Paya literally means Lord. Like the Buddha is called Paya, or anyone's spiritual master, if they're considered to be very highly advanced, is called Paya. A pagoda also, or a temple also, is called Paya. And the Ananda Paya is huge, and it's just very elaborate. You go inside, and there are 4 huge standing Buddhas they tried to make them anatomically correct in accordance with the 32 marks of a perfected sage, which makes them look kind of weird because like their knees are way, way up so that the palms of their hands can rest on their knees, because that's one of the signs of the great man, the Mahapurisa, is that when he stands upright at rest, his hands just fit right onto his kneecaps, which makes very strange anatomy if you try to get all of these marks. And right when you get inside, in front of or to the sides of the main standing Buddha image, you got an image of King Chanzitta, who had the thing built. He was the second king of the great Pagan Empire after the Mons were defeated. So he was the successor of Anurata, who converted the country to Theravada. And on the other side, you've got an image of Shin Arahan. And this, to some degree, the Ananda Pagoda, or the Ananda Temple, was designed for teaching purposes, where people could go through these corridors and look at the different scenes in the Buddha's life. Up on the roof, there are tiles, colored painted tiles, also showing, I believe it's Jataka stories, like tales from the Buddha's previous lives before he became the Buddha. Although there are other pagodas that are equally impressive, like the Sulamani is one of my favorites. It's really beautiful. And when I first got there, this was back in the early to mid 90s, first time I went to Pagan. First of all, you could climb up on top of the pagodas. They've got the top part is sort of pagoda shaped, and most of them have like steps going up where you can get up to like a platform way up high. And yeah, I did that a lot, go up there and meditate and stuff, but now the government says you're not allowed to do it anymore. And also, when I first went to Pagan, my favorite pagodas, or some of my favorites, were just old, like sort of smallish, medium-sized temples just out in some farmer's field, just abandoned. And you go inside, and there'd be this Buddha sitting there just in serene meditation with his belly completely ripped out, because like treasure hunters would be looking for enshrined like treasure inside the belly of the Buddha. So a lot of the Buddhas had their bellies ripped out in Pagan. The government, this was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, they decided that Westerners would be more willing to pay money to see renovated temples than to see ancient ruins. And so they just went through and fixed almost all of the pagodas and the temples there, which caused oh, what is it? What's that? Oh, some World Heritage. No, UNESCO was just fuming over it, and they did a cheesy job. I mean, they tried to use traditional methods of renovating the temples, but it didn't work out. They made the mortar too thick, and then it started washing out in the rain. And you got the big signs saying who the donors are for fixing each temple. It's not as good as it was before, although there are places that are more or equally impressive or equally edifying. You know, there are nice places to go, as nice as Pagan, in my opinion. Some people prefer other places to Pagan in Burma. Although there's at least one other ancient town from Pagan times that still exists in ruins. It's on the highway between Monua and Pakoku, where you'll just pass through like the city gates. There's still remnants of the brick wall, and you can still see the mounds of the old pagodas that have not been renovated. So that's kind of interesting. It's kind of nice to be in a country like I live in the USA, where you just don't have ancient ruins other than maybe some Indian burial mounds or something. But just happening upon some, ruined temple out in the woods is really nice. I like that. So let's see here. There are pagodas everywhere in Burma. Every hilltop practically has got a pagoda. Um, One of the more famous pagodas in Burma is in Pago, I'm pretty sure. It's bigger than the Shwedagon. The Shwedagon is huge. This one is bigger. I don't remember how many meters or feet tall it is. And it was built by the Mons. It was built by some king of the second Mon Empire after the Mongols sacked the first Burmese empire. The Mon Empire grew. Pago became their capital, which is now in sort of south central Burma. And there's a great big pagoda there too, which is nice. I've never really stopped to look at it. You can see it as you're driving by Pago because it's so big. Let's see, also a relatively old um, shrine in Burma is near Pagan. I think it's south of Pagan. It's called Mount Popa. And I think a lot of cultures will have like their sacred mountain. Like the Greeks had Olympus, the Indians had Mount Meru, which was, way up into the Himalayas. Just the Himalayas in general were their sacred mountains. And the Burmese have Mount Popa, which is not a very big mountain. It's hardly more than a rocky hill, but it's pretty impressive because it's just such a flat plain of just arid land. And then there's this green outcrop of rock that's flat on top. And there's some kind of natural springs that are coming out of it. So that it's just green. It's covered with flowers and greenery. That's Popa, the name of the mountain, is the Burmese pronunciation for the Pali word for flower, because it's covered with flowers. And that was the home of the Nat cult. In addition to being sort of tantric Buddhists, probably even dating before then, the Burmese worshipped, I think it's 32 Nats, 37, 30 something Nats. And Nats are just like a small g god. And the Burmese Nats were all human in their previous existence, and they were all sort of heroic, great-spirited, magnanimous people who died a violent death. And the Burmese believe that a person who dies a violent death is called a sane, and their spirit is more powerful, so that they can even become, relatively powerful, maybe even scary, small g gods. And the Nat cult was based on Mount Popa. And there are scroungy monkeys there you can feed, which is very nice. You're not allowed to take any meat onto the mountain. I remember I went there with a friend of mine, and I can't remember. He had somehow just accidentally happened to have a can of Spam on him or something, and he was sternly warned, you cannot bring that Spam onto this mountain because you're not allowed to bring meat there. And still, it's mostly just medieval structures because the buildings just do not last very long when they're made out of brick, unless they're really huge ones, or they're living, or they're just in a really dry place. Like Upper Burma is semi-arid, so the old temples and so forth last longer down there. There's well, I suppose next I should mention Mandalay, which is the second city of Burma. Used to be the capital of Burma for a while, and probably the big religious monument or shrine in Mandalay is the Mahamuni Paya, which is a temple with this gold encrusted Buddha statue inside. And the story behind that is the Burmese believe that the Mahamuni was sculpted by Saka, king of gods himself, just using the Buddha as his model. So it supposedly looks exactly like the Buddha, but I mean, obviously it's very stylized. It's not in a realistic style. And it was formerly owned by the Rakhines. And the Rakhines were a different kingdom in between. Well, it's now in Burma, but it was like right up along the border of what is now Bangladesh. So the Rohingya problems that you hear about in the news over the past several years, that's mostly in Rakhine, which was an independent nation at one time. And the Burmese and the Rakhines were like arch enemies. And the Rakhines believed that so long as they possessed this Mahamuni pagoda, or this Mahamuni statue, this image, that they would win. And finally, there was a Burmese expedition where they captured the Mahamuni. One of its arms broke off, but I think they replaced it. And they brought it to Mandalay, which I think at the time may have been the capital. And it's sort of like Shwedagon, where it's part of this big compound with all sorts of little temples and museums and the statues and so forth. There are two guardian statues. They look sort of like late medieval soldiers. And the belief is that if you rub parts of their body, it'll cure you of what you got wrong with the corresponding part of your own body. And you can tell that a lot of Burmese people have belly problems, like stomach problems and knee problems, because the belly and the knees are very shiny on these statues. Also in Mandalay, you've got Mandalay Hill with this long walkway you can go up, and it's just studded with temples. Almost all there is on Mandalay Hill is just temple after temple after temple after temple. A lot of fortune tellers at the top there who are predatory, so you have to be careful about those. And interestingly, at the base of Mandalay Hill, I don't remember the name of the monastery, but they may have genuine relics of Gautama Buddha there. And you can find supposed relics of Gautama Buddha, all sorts, just all over the place. Like I've already mentioned that some of these temples have cheesy little museums associated with them, and there may be a whole room just showing relics of famous monks and the Buddha himself. They're called datdo. Supposedly, when you burn the corpse of an enlightened being, it doesn't necessarily happen, but it's only if they were an enlightened being that these datdo will appear in the ashes, and they're like little pearls. They're like little white balls. And my sweetheart was of the opinion, and I think she may be right, that they're like kidney stones or gallstones or something. They just don't look for them if somebody else dies. They look for them if they think this person was a saint, and if they find them, that's supposedly proof. But I think I've read about Mahayana monks in China also dropping these little white balls when they're cremated, and the Theravadins, I don't think they would admit that these Mahayana monks were fully enlightened. So there is that. But at this one monastery in Mandalay Hill, you can go there and you can ask to see this. That apparently what happened was after the Buddha died, his relics, his ashes were split up. I think it was like seven portions. And then the Emperor Ashoka, 1 or 2 centuries later, between 1 and 2 centuries later, he broke into these relic chambers and divided it up farther. And then around, I shouldn't even try to guess, maybe the 2nd century of the Common Era, there was the Kushan Empire, which um, occupied like northwestern India, what is now Pakistan, Afghanistan, parts of Central Asia. And he was establishing, my eye itches, he was establishing a capital city in what is now Peshawar in Pakistan. He built this huge pagoda. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world, outside of classical Greece and Rome. It was this huge pagoda. And he, well, how should I say this? When the Muslims came, they just leveled it. They just destroyed it. So there was almost nothing remaining, a little bit of rubble maybe. So then during British times, British archaeologists in the British colony of India dug it up because they could see where the center was. So they dug down there thinking there might be a relic chamber, and indeed they did find a relic chamber. And they found this gold container. Inside the gold container is this crystal vial, and it has got the name of Kanishka on it. And inside of the crystal vial are little pieces of charred bone. They're not like the pearl datdos that you find all over Burma. They're just little pieces of charred bone. And so there is a good chance that Kanishka, who was founding his capital city with this magnificent pagoda, that he broke into Ashoka's pagodas and got some genuine relics of the Buddha, because he'd want the genuine article for his capital city giant pagoda, and he buried them there. And ironically, the Burmese, who put a lot of store by the little round balls, which I don't think that really proves anything. If you find little round balls in somebody's cremated remains, they don't know about these Peshawar relics and just don't care. But you can go there and see that, and maybe I can include the name of the monastery, show it on a picture or something. So there's one place I've been to in Shan State, which is more to the east. It's bordering on Thailand. In fact, the name Shan, which is an ethnicity in Burma, has the same etymology as the word Siam. So they're ethnically more related to the Thais than to the Burmese. But there is a place there called Pindia up in the hills on the Shan Plateau, and it's surrounded by tea plantations. And it's a cave. It's like a natural cave, but somebody at some point, probably like late medieval times, very early modern times, they just filled this cave with Buddha statues. So you just go through this natural cave, it's just like all these rooms and corridors and everything, just Buddha statue after Buddha statue after Buddha statue. And I met one German fellow who said he preferred Pindia to Pagan. That was probably even back before they messed up Pagan by renovating the ruins. Probably the one part of Burma that I know about more than any other is in the northwest, like in the Chindwin Valley area, because that's where I spent a lot of time. More than half my time in Burma was spent in that general area. And my favorite place in all of Burma that would qualify as like a religious monument is called Po Windown. And Po Windown is a medieval cave temple complex. I mean, it's big. There's probably more than 1,000 of these little cave temples, just everywhere, all over the place. And some of them are very small. You can hardly stand up. You go in, there's just like a little altar with a Buddha statue there. Some of them are large with murals and just lined with Buddhas. You can just walk down this corridor with Buddhas lined up, at least on one side. And Po Win was some kind of wizard or alchemist who supposedly lived there. But one of my favorite things about Po Win Down is there's troops of scroungy monkeys, and you can feed them. And if you plan on feeding monkeys there, excuse me, you should bring your own, because the food they sell to feed is just like cracked corn, and they're just living on this crummy diet. So bringing little bananas or oranges or something, fruit, and jujubes, fruit that monkeys like, they really appreciate that. And so I would go mainly to feed the monkeys. Really, I have to admit, I have a confession to make here. I'm really not into Burmese Buddhist monuments or architecture. Like, I've been to Bodh Gaya in India, and it's kind of impressive. But the impressive thing about it is just the idea that the Buddha actually walked there. You know, there have been Buddhist saints like occupying that same ground for more than 2,000 years. And that's really what impresses me more than the architecture. I mean, some architecture is nice, you know, like the Ananda temple in Pagan is very nice. The Sulamani is very nice, but most of it is really not all that spectacular. The Shwedagon can be spectacular, especially at night. You know, you're just flying into Burma on the international, you know, Boeing airplane. You just see this big gold pagoda on the hill in Rangoon. I mean, it's really eye-catching. It's very striking, but after all, it's just piles of bricks or carved caves or whatever. So I get more of a thrill from feeding monkeys or feeding turtles, that kind of a thing. Also, in right next to Po Windown, I don't remember the name of this other place, but there's this big knoll of sandstone, and somebody at some point, I think this would be modern times, like British times, they got the idea of just digging down into this solid sandstone, digging a stairway down into it, and then just digging these corridors that are just lined with temples, like Buddhist temples. So that's kind of nice too. It's interesting. I've never seen a place like that before. Although some place like Petra in what is it, Jordan or Iraq or something, you know, that might be similar, just carved out of the solid rock. Let's see what else. Oh, also in that same general part of Burma, near the city of Monua, just south of Monua, there's a place called Thambote, which was built in modern times. It was built around the time of World War II, I think. It's just really spectacular. You go inside and there's literally thousands and thousands of Buddha statues. Somebody took the trouble of counting all of them. It's somewhere up around 100,000. And just the spires on the roof of this place are really spectacular. And they've got turtles there. They got a turtle pond you can feed, and these big catfish too. Also, there's this one cheesy little observation tower that reminiscent of some other places in Burma. It's only men are allowed to go up there. They got the sign at the bottom in substandard English saying that women can't go up there. And just right next to that is another place that I think it's a monastery. Although most monasteries, I mean, the monastery architecture is not all that impressive. You know, it's just standard brick buildings. But this place, it's Bodhatown. No, Bodhidatown. It's not Bodhatown like in Rangoon. It's Bodhidatown. Bodhitown means 1,000 army officers. Bodhidatown means 1,000 Bodhi trees, and they've got just lots and lots of Bodhi trees there. And they've got these huge, just relatively recently constructed, this cheesy-looking giant Buddha statues there that you can go inside and take an elevator up to the top, but it's not very pretty, I'm sorry to say. But it's just kind of, I mean, if you're impressed by just sheer size. But overall, Burma's got just, they're not a very aesthetically gifted people as far as I can tell. The Burmese, there's not a lot of really talented art or inspired architecture other than maybe around the time of Pagan, like 1,000 years ago. And I'm not sure why that is. The Burmese are just, it's just part of the national character, I think. They're just a very stoic kind of a people. They don't really care whether their food tastes good or not, for example. So if you go to Burma, you want to do a meditation retreat, then you've got like a week left over just to see the sights, then yeah, I would recommend going and seeing some of the sights. And it is kind of nice just to find the places that aren't famous. Like right near the cave that I lived for 10 years in the same Monua area, just north of Monua on the Chindwin River, there were a number of just abandoned temples that people would use them for just storing grain sometimes, Or some of them, I mean, they're just full of just bat poop and fluttering bats, and nobody goes there. But it's really impressive just to come across like medieval temple ruins or just old pagodas. Lots of places you go, and it's nice. And I would recommend it if you happen to be in Burma. I mean, you might not want to go all the way there just to look at old pagodas, bell-shaped piles of bricks. But there's a lot of faith involved in just covering a country with pagodas and temples and Buddha statues. And it's almost 8 o'clock by my reckoning, and I've got an appointment at 8, and so I think I'd better stop here. So I hope whoever requested this at least learned something, and maybe even some of you other guys learned something. So that's nice. And be